From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Eric Cline, as a matter of fact, he's the first person I've ever met who has his own Wikipedia page, is a professor of classics and anthropology at George Washington University. You know, I make notes and memorize them. He's a specialist in biblical archaeology, military history of the Mediterranean from antiquity to the present. He's written or collaborated on 16 books and written nearly 100 articles. He has also been featured on a number of television presentations. His book, 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Collapsed, is a fascinating read. The stories and the conclusions are truly interesting. May we welcome Dr. Eric Cline.
Thank you very much. Wow, it's bright up here. You can all hear me, I hope? Okay, wonderful. This is the first time for me. This is extremely exciting and an honor, and I thank you all for coming today. Now, one thing I am going to do is illustrate with slides, but I'll explain to you if you can't see where you are what we're doing. And what I want to do is present some of the findings from the book and basically show you why I think it's one of the most fascinating periods in history, this 1177 BC. It's the end of the late Bronze Age. We're talking about 3,000 years ago, obviously. And this is when everything collapses. Most people think about the end of Rome as the major collapse. I would argue that this is as significant, if not even more significant for us today. So what happened, I'll give you the background for a moment. When Rob Tempio from Princeton University Press came down to GW and said to me, I want you to write a book on the collapse. And I said, well, sure, I can write a book on the collapse, but you know what is as interesting is what collapsed. And so I said, I'll write a book about the collapse if you can allow me, in a large part of it, to write about what collapsed, because it was an international world back then. It was globalized, and in part, I think that's why it did collapse. And he said, okay, fine, I'll give you latitude, which was nice. And so the ensuing result is what you see here. So the beginning of the book talks about a group, the Sea Peoples, that I'll go back to in a moment. And then the end is about what might have caused the collapse, because to be honest, we still don't know. There are a number of possibilities out there, and I go through the various possibilities and come up with what I think might be the most logical answer. But this is archaeology. This is ancient history. This is 3,000 years ago. We're not sure what happened. So we came up with it. I wrote it. And then he said to me, and I don't know if he remembers this, he said, I want to make a book trailer. I said, a book trailer? What's that? He says, well, it's where you stand up in front of the camera and you advertise your book as if it's a movie coming out. And I said, what, you want me to hold my book and say, please buy it? And I said, I won't do that. No. And he says, no, I have in mind something really over the top. So we got together with an ex-student of mine, Jesse Krinsky, who runs Gold Medal Productions, and he put together about a minute-long trailer. And it ran for, probably 6 months before the book came out. I have no idea if it had any effect on sales, but it was a lot of fun to do. So if you want, I can show that to you. If not, we'll just skip right through. You want to? Yeah? All right. Yeah, so let's see. It'll be projected here. Hopefully the sound will be up, because the sound is everything. And I will warn you right now, it is completely over the top. And it is made tongue-in-cheek. It's supposed to be one of these summer blockbuster things. So let's see if we can get this working. Thank you. I will now take questions. Seriously, how can you follow that? All right. So anyway, we had a lot of fun doing it, and I thank Rob Tempio for making us do it, and thank Jesse Krinsky for making it in the first place. So if you see further book trailers out there, like Adrienne Meyer's done one for her Amazon's book, so I think this is maybe the way of the future, but we'll see, we'll see. Anyway, let me go back for a moment then and take a look and see exactly where we are, and actually, I can't even see my slides there, so, oh, there we go, okay. What we're dealing with is the Late Bronze Age. This is from about 1700 to 1200 BC, and this is the age when we have the Minoans and the Mycenaeans and the Hittites and various other people. It is an interconnected world. Now, you've probably heard about some of these people already. This is the time of Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh. Thutmosis III, one of the greatest conquerors of all of Egypt. Amenhotep III, who is my favorite guy, father of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh. King Tut, you've heard of. Ramses II, possibly the pharaoh of the Exodus. And then Ramses III, and he is the man under whom pretty much everything collapses during the time of the catastrophe, as we call it. Now, this is also the time period of the Battle of Kadesh, the Trojan War. Some of you may have heard of that or seen the movie with Brad Pitt. And also the time of the Exodus. So these are all about 1250, 1200 BC. This is the end of the Late Bronze Age here. Now, it has been said, for the most part, there we go. It's hard, it's at a very, very bad angle for me. Actually, we can't turn that a little bit, can we, so I can see it? No? Just if we, yeah, okay. All right. It's, there we go. If we can turn it just a bit so I can catch a glimpse which one it is. There we go, perfect, thank you. Good, and you all can still see it? Okay, good, because now I can see it too and I know where I am. Right. Okay, it has been said for about 100 years or so that the Sea Peoples were the culprit. This is an explanation that was come up with by Gaston Maspero, one of the earliest Egyptologists. He was French, and he said, oh, there's this group named the Sea Peoples that the Egyptians talk about. They don't actually call them that, but in French it comes out to the Sea Peoples. And he said, they're the ones that are responsible for destroying absolutely everything at the end of the Late Bronze Age. The thing, though, is he came up with this theory based on one inscription, one major one plus a couple little minor ones, but before any of the archaeology had been done. And so thereafter, anytime any site was excavated, and they found that it had been destroyed, they attributed it to the Sea Peoples. And so this has become kind of a bogeyman. This is, oh my goodness, you know, the Sea Peoples are going to come and get you. And this has changed a little bit over time, and that was in part what I wanted to do in the book, was to say that the Sea Peoples may not be completely responsible for the collapse. And in fact, I think that they are almost a symptom rather than the cause. That is, they are as much victims as they are oppressors. So this is one of the things that I wanted to take a look at in this book. And people had put out a fairly simplified way of looking at things. They said there was a drought back then that caused a famine, that caused the Sea Peoples to start. They cut the trade routes, and therefore everything collapsed. Now, that is certainly possible, but I would say this is a little bit too simple, and I would add in a couple of other factors, because I don't think it's just drought. There is drought, I'll show you that in a moment, but I think it's other things as well, because we know there are earthquakes, we know that there are other invaders, and so on and so forth. So I think it's a multitude of factors, and hopefully I'll be able to show that. So what I want to talk to you today, and what I did in the book, was to really ask what happened. But I started out going through some of the evidence that we've got. So for instance, let me just give you this as a kind of a fun and interesting example. We're in the Bronze Age. Bronze Age starts in about 3000 BC. That's the early Bronze Age. We're down in the Late Bronze Age at this time. Some of you may know that to make bronze, you take tin and copper, 90% copper, 10% tin, and you make bronze. By the way, if you don't have any tin available, you can use arsenic as well, though I don't recommend that. You'll have a very short lifespan. Now, the copper in antiquity, it comes from a number of places, but the main one is Cyprus at this time. And so the island known as Alashia is where the copper comes from. The tin, most of it is coming from Afghanistan. Right, there's a little bit from southern Turkey. There's some evidence that they might have gone up to Cornwall occasionally, but the vast majority of the tin is coming all the way from modern-day Afghanistan. And so some of the scholars that have studied this have shown this in the written tablets. This is a tablet from Mari, which is on the Euphrates in Mesopotamia. And there they say they're 1/3 of a mina of tin to the Caphtorians. That's a guy from Crete. 1/3 of a mina to the interpreter. So there's somebody that is multilingual back then. Now, if you take a look and you see these trade routes that are bringing the tin over to Mari and then to Ugarit and then from there over to Crete, if those are cut at any time, you're in a lot of trouble. And so, for instance, one of my colleagues, Carol Bell, who's over in England, has said that the acquisition of tin and thereby bronze was as concerning to the Egyptian pharaoh as the acquisition of oil is today to the US president and to all of us. Some of you probably remember the gas lines back in the 1970s. All right, I remember those. And that's what would have happened at this time if those trade routes had fallen and you couldn't get tin anymore. Now, of course, iron is going to take over after that, and that's what happens when you get something that's been necessary is now gone, something else comes in and takes its place. So we have evidence for international trade routes. And I think you'll agree with me that getting from Afghanistan all the way to Greece and Crete is fairly significant back then, even as it is today. But we've also got other evidence, which for me is fascinating. The stories of the ancient world just come to life for me. That's what I love about them. And here we have, for example, in those same Mari tablets, we have them saying that they are importing weapons made out of gold inlaid with lapis lazuli that are made in the Minoan style. And these were being sent all the way over to ancient Mesopotamia. My absolute favorite are these. In those same letters, it says that a pair of leather shoes, probably sandals, made in the Minoan style, were brought to Hammurabi, king of Babylon. Now that's the Hammurabi, like eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, the famous lawgiver, but they were returned by him. Now, why would he return these shoes? I have no idea. Did they not fit? Were they, so last millennium? Absolutely no idea. If I were him, I would have kept it and regifted it. But, so, they were not that different from us. All right, now some of the other things that I could show, I could go on literally for hours, but other people need this stage. So let me just whiz through a couple of these just to give you examples of the internationalization, their version of globalization in the ancient Mediterranean that we've got, and then I'll go to some of the causes for the collapse and in the end see what you think. So you're looking here at Hatshepsut, the famous female pharaoh, and we know, for instance, that rather than military campaigns, she was more interested in peaceful mercantile trading embassies. And so here, this is a depiction of her sending an expedition down to Punt. And Punt, they show us what everybody looks like. They've even got the queen down bottom there, Eti. The one problem is we didn't quite know where Punt is. It's been suggested to be in Ethiopia or Yemen or elsewhere. But just recently, researchers looking at mummies of baboons have said that these are coming from Eritrea or Ethiopia. So now we're pretty sure where Punt is. Now, she's not the only one that sends embassies there. A number of Egyptian pharaohs are trading back and forth with Punt. But this gives you some idea of the international trade. And the tomb paintings that are inside the Egyptian nobles' tombs are even better. This, for example, is a depiction of a trade embassy coming from Greece. The people carrying the stuff are somewhere in the Aegean, whether it's Mycenaean Greece or Minoan Crete, we can't be absolutely sure. But the way they're dressing and the objects that they're actually holding are coming from the Aegean all the way over to Egypt. Same here. We've got Other people carrying things like bull's heads, which are very typically Minoan. So we know that there is trade going back and forth in the time of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III. So this is the 15th century BC. It's 300 years before everything's collapsed. But you really need to go back 3 centuries in order to understand what it was that collapsed. So my favorite guy, Amenhotep III, these are the colossi of Memnon. I venture to guess a number of you, how many have gone there and seen these in person? Right, absolutely amazing, 60 feet tall, and they are guarding the front of a temple that's now gone. It was quarried and robbed out by later pharaohs for their own uses. But what most people don't know is that behind, inside, where the temple used to be, are a line, actually there's about 40 of them now they've found, of slightly larger than life-size statues, maybe about 10 feet tall or so. And on each of these, they have lists of names of foreign places. And I just give you this one as an example because this is known as the Aegean list. It's a list of names of places from Greece. On one side, you've got Tanaia, which is mainland Greece, and on the other side, you've got Keftiu, which is Crete. And then running around the side of the base are names like Mycenae, Knossos, Kythera, all kinds of places that belong to the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. And it looks like if you go to those actual sites, you find objects that belong to Amenhotep III or his wife, Queen T. So to me, it's clear that this list is not just a random list. I actually think it's a record of an embassy or of a voyage. Basically, it's how you get to Greece from Egypt and back again. And we have things like faience plaques with his name on it, vessels with Amenhotep III's name. We've even got scarabs with his name or his wife's name. So this is something that's not quite usual. And in fact, if we plot this on a map, the way the sites go, it really does look like you're going from Egypt to Crete and then up to mainland Greece, and then back down to Crete and back to Egypt again. And there's one site, Amnisos, that appears twice. It's one of the first ones and one of the last ones. And I see this as kind of the bathroom stop, right? Are we there yet? Can we stop for food, water, and the bathroom? So you're going from Egypt. What are you going to do when you first get to Crete is stop, and then you can keep going. And of course, then it's the last stop before 23 more miles or whatever it is that we have on the New Jersey Turnpike, right? So I do think that this is a record of a geographical itinerary, and bear in mind that this is about 3,300 years ago. And we actually do have evidence of ships that were making journeys back then. This is the well-known Uluburun shipwreck, which sank off the coast of Turkey in about 1300 BC. It's been excavated by Texas A&M, the Institute of Nautical Archaeology. George Bass and Jamal Pulik have been diving there in the 80s and the 90s. And on this ship are the remains from 7 different cultures. It shows the international and cosmopolitan nature at the time. And what it has mostly is about 300 ingots of solid, pure copper. It also has tin on board, and it's got raw things from elsewhere. Now, we have in the ancient records from about this time, we have one guy, the king of Cyprus, who apologizes and says, I'm only sending you 200 talents of copper. Now, each of those ingots is probably an ancient talent. We've got 300 on this ship. So he's not writing about this ship, but about another one. But it gives you an idea of what he's got. This is ancient tin, some of it in raw form, and some of it used in the form of plates and other things. And then glass, ancient glass, raw glass with blue. It's colored with cobalt, and ivory, and various other things. So all kinds of raw materials, including terebinth resin that you could use in perfume, and finished products. These are unused Canaanite and Cypriot vessels that would have been given or for sale. And we're not actually sure if this is the ship belonging to a private merchant or whether it was a gift from a king. I can tell you one thing, that when it went down that dark and stormy night in 1300 BC, somebody lost a fortune. And they did have insurers back then, so I hope this guy was insured. All right, so that gives you some idea of what we've got. Now, other things that we've got from here, there is a letter from the site of Ugarit, which is on the north coast of Syria. And this one letter says that the king of Ugarit exempts a man named Sinaranu from tax, basically. His grain, his beer, his olive oil to the palace he shall not deliver. His ship is exempt when it comes from Crete. So again, you've got tax breaks for the wealthy back then. Things don't change. Now, the collapse. What happens here? All this, everything that I've just painted a picture, and I have to tell you, I had great fun writing what I consider to be stories of the ancient world. You may get lost among the ancient names of the rulers and the places, so we have a glossary at the back, and you can impress your friends and neighbors by memorizing those. But it all goes away by 1200 or a little after, and that's what I spend the last couple of chapters talking about. All right, so one of the things that we've got is letters again from Ugarit, and you can see it's the little red circle there on the north coast of of Syria, almost up near Turkey. And here, we've got a number of archives from houses, mostly upper level people that are working for the king or the queen. And one of the letters reads, and I know it's too small for you to see, so let me read it out loud here. It says, "My father, now the ships of the enemy have come. They have been setting fire to my cities and have done harm to the land. Doesn't my father know that all of my infantry and my territory are stationed in Hatti," that's ancient Turkey, "and all of my ships are stationed in the land of Luka," that's over on the southwest coast of Turkey. "They've not arrived back, and the land is thus prostrate. It's under attack. Now the 7 ships of the enemy which have been coming here have done harm to us. If there are others coming, send me a report." Now, it was long reported in the literature that this was found in a kiln and it was being baked before it had been sent, and that, in fact, the city had been destroyed before it could be sent. More recent reanalysis have shown it was not in a kiln. It was actually in a basket that was up on the 2nd floor, and it fell and turned upside down, which gave it the kiln-like shape. And in fact, it's probably a copy of a letter that was, in fact, sent. Now, the question is, to whom do these ships belong? And that we cannot be sure. Most people said these were the Sea Peoples. But the question is, who exactly are the Sea Peoples? This is the one relief that we've got, and I alluded to it at the beginning of this presentation. This is the wall of Medinet Habu. It's the mortuary temple of Ramses III. And he tells us on this wall, he's got pictures and he's got a text, and he says as follows: "The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their lands. All at once they were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms. From Hate, Kode, Carchemish, Artsua, and Alashia on, being cut off at one time." He's describing these sea peoples that are coming, and he even names them. He says the federation was the Peleset, the Tejeker, the Shekelesh, the Denyen, and the Weshesh lands united. Our problem is that we don't know where most of these people come from or where they go to. And the inscription keeps going. He's got pictures of them. These are what they look like. But in the end, we really don't know where they come from. There's no city that you can point to where they either came from or they ended up. So people have played linguistic games with these. And one of the groups, for instance, the Shardana, they say, oh, that sounds like Sardinia. So that is probably where they came from. The Shekelesh, that sounds like Sicily. So maybe that's where they came from. The Tejeker might be up by Troy. You can see they're guessing, basically. The Denyen, those might be Homer's Danaans. The Peleset, finally we have somebody. The Peleset are probably the Philistines, and the Bible says they come from Crete, which would work in here. But to be honest, we're not quite sure where these people go or where they come from. And in fact, it's possible that rather than coming from Sardinia, that's where they went after where they were defeated, and they gave their name there. So the upshot is that we're not really sure about many of these people. The one group would be the Philistines, the Peleset, and then we have found their remains up and down the coast, especially in what is now modern-day Israel. Now, this group, though, these groups, there's 9 of them all told, it's not just like Vikings. They're not just coming in raiding. they're actually a movement of peoples. And as part of the drawings that Ramses III has left us on his walls, he shows us their families, and he says they're coming in ox carts. So this is a migration. It's not just Viking raids, as I have said. The problem is that I don't think that they alone could have caused the collapse of everything. I mean, there's been lots of raiders, lots of activities in the Middle East, including today, and usually people survive in the end. So I think that it was more than just the Sea Peoples, and in fact, like I said at the beginning, I think maybe they are part of what is happening, not necessarily the cause for it. So for instance, there is evidence now for drought. Now, this has been a theory that's been around for about 60 years in archaeology. Rhys Carpenter from Bryn Mawr back in the 1960s or so suggested that maybe the Bronze Age had ended because of drought, but he was never able to prove it. Well, in the last 3 years alone, there have been 4 separate studies that have shown that there was drought starting in about 1250 BC, and that there was, if you want to call it that, climate change back then. Now, it's not man-made, obviously. The Hittites are not driving SUVs. I'm well aware of that. But you don't need humans to have climate change. Climate change happens again and again and again. The question is, can you survive it? Well, in their case, I don't think they could. So we have one study that focused in on North Syria, and they're doing pollen analysis here, and they can show that the climate is getting drier, more arid. There was a similar study done on Cyprus, that it was also affected at about this time. There was another study Lee Drake has done with 3 or 4 separate parts to it, showing, for instance, that the surface of the Mediterranean Sea is changing at that time, which results in less rain on the Greek mainland, and again would end up with drought. And then the most recent has been done by Israel Finkelstein and Daphne Langut and others who were working in Israel by the Sea of Galilee, for instance, and the Dead Sea, and they also came up with proof that there was a drought there for about 100 or 150 years. So I think drought is definitely one of the factors, and of course the media took this and ran with it. You've got the LA Times here. Climate change may have caused demise of late Bronze Age civilizations, and you've got New York Times following it as well, and everybody got into the big climate change debate a couple of months ago. But I don't think that that was all there was, because with drought comes famine, of course. If you can't get enough to eat because all your plants are dead, that is going to affect you as well. And we know from the textual evidence that there was famine. This, for example, is a letter from Ugarit, which dates to about 1185. It's sent by a city in inland Syria, and they say, "There is famine in our house, we will all die of hunger. If you do not quickly arrive here, we ourselves will die of hunger. You will not see a living soul from your land." To me, at least, that seems pretty clear that there was a famine going on here. And we've also got a letter from the king of Ugarit, again on the north coast of Syria. He's sending it to an unidentified recipient, and he simply says, "Here with me, plenty has become famine." Again, I think that's pretty clear evidence that there was famine back then. And then another letter, this time from the Hittite king up in Turkey. "Do you not know that there was famine in the midst of my land? It is a matter of life and death." Now, I don't know if he was exaggerating or not, but again, we've definitely got evidence for famine. We've also got evidence for the cutting of trade routes at this time. Remember I was saying that if the trade route for tin, for example, was cut off, they would be in a great deal of trouble. And so here, one of the last letters from Ugarit says, "When your messenger arrived, the army was already humiliated and the city was sacked. Our food in the threshing floors was burnt and the vineyards were also destroyed. Our city is sacked. May you know it. May you know it." And that was it for the city. So we've got evidence for invaders, not only textual, but also archaeological. There's a site called Tel Twine, which was excavated again up in North Syria, and there they have found arrowheads in the walls and burnt layers of destruction. It's very obvious that the city was destroyed by warfare. But we we do have a problem. You know, in the past, everybody would have said, ah, that's the Sea Peoples. It's the right time, it's the right place. And I would say, wait, not so much. There's actually no evidence for sure that it's the Sea Peoples. And I would give you just one example. Hatzor in what is today Israel, ancient Canaan. We know that it's destroyed. The late Bronze Age palace is absolutely burnt to a crisp. These are all mud bricks that you're seeing that have been baked orange and black and brown from the heat of the fire. The problem is, even though we know it's destroyed, we don't know who did it. And even the two co-directors are split. Some of the possible culprits are Egyptians or Canaanites or Israelites or our friends the Sea Peoples, or internal rebellion. And one of the co-directors favors that the people of the city rose up and destroyed their rulers. So even when we have a destruction, we don't always know what caused it. In some cases, though, it's quite clear. When you have a site destroyed by an earthquake, then we frequently know it. If the whole city is destroyed and you don't have arrowheads, it's pretty much sure that it's Mother Nature that destroyed it. And so, for instance, here we have a map of most of the sites that are destroyed in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean at the end of the Late Bronze Age. And if you overlay this on top of a map where earthquakes have happened just in the last century, you can see that almost all of the sites are in the earthquake zones. Now, if you have earthquakes there now, you had them back then. So one might suggest that a number of the destructions are actually caused not by humans, but by Mother Nature. And in fact, the fault lines run throughout this area. There's the North Anatolian fault line. There's another series of faults that goes down through Greece. There's a fault line that comes right up the Rift Valley through the Dead Sea and Jericho. And it may be that a number of earthquakes occurred here. And in fact, we do see that there are a number of destructions between about 1225 and 1175 where the site does seem to have been destroyed by earthquakes. Now, this happens in like an earthquake storm where the fault unzips. It's a known phenomenon. If an earthquake doesn't release all the tension, another one will happen next to it a little bit later, a week, a decade, something like that. And you'll get the fault line unzipping, usually in about a 50-year period. And we've actually seen this in Turkey over the last 50 or 60 years. So I would suggest that we probably had some sort of earthquake storm back then as well. Now, frequently it's easy to tell. These are fallen column drums and all that. That's what happens if you get an earthquake. Mycenae itself in Greece is built right on top of an earthquake fault. Right? You've got a slip right there. And that was where I thought, wait a minute, why would anybody build their city directly on top of a fault line? And then I thought, oh, wait a minute, yeah, San Francisco, okay. So Mycenae is on top of a fault line, and in fact, there are dead bodies at Mycenae from this time period, where in this case, this poor unfortunate woman was killed by a rock landing on her head. She's in the basement of her house. We've also got Tyrann's, various bodies. We've got at Troy, about the time of the Trojan War, we've got huge blocks that are thrown over. And we've even got back at Ugarit itself in North Syria, you can see that wall. It's not supposed to look like that, trust me. It's not supposed to be that wavy. So I think we've also then got earthquakes at this time. Now, if we sum up with all of this, what I think we've got is as follows. We have a number of separate civilizations that are flourishing during the period of the Late Bronze Age, that is 15th to 13th centuries, down to about 1200 BC. And these include people that are the Minoans, the Mycenaeans, Hittites, Egyptians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Canaanites, Cypriots, all of our friends from the Late Bronze Age. They're independent, but they're interacting with each other, especially through international trade routes. Now, it's also clear that many of the cities are destroyed, and that civilization as they knew it basically came to an end in about the year 1177. Now, I chose that year 1177 because that's the year that Ramses III records these sea peoples coming through. In fact, the collapse takes about a century overall, but 1177 is a good, almost like a bookmark, shall we say. For instance, the fall of Rome is 476, right? Well, it's actually not. It's about a century that Rome falls. But 476 is our shorthand for the fall of Rome. So I would say here that 1177 is shorthand for the collapse at the late Bronze Age. The problem is there's really no proof for who did it or what did it. And there are a number of even scholarly publications that today suggest it's a linear progression. And they say that a drought, again, caused famine, which caused the sea peoples, which caused them to cut the trade routes. And I would argue that it was not that linear, that the reality was much, much messier. And in fact, I think what we can say is that there probably wasn't one single driving force. It's not the sea peoples, it's a number of different things, right? Droughts, famine, earthquakes, invaders, rebellions. You know, you could survive a drought, fine. People have done that. Look at the 1930s and the Dust Bowl. You could survive famine. You could survive earthquakes. You could survive invasions. But what if they all take place at the same time? Then it's like, oi, I give up, right? So I think that what we've got is kind of almost a domino situation then, where when one falls, the next one falls too, because they are all dependent on each other. If the Mycenaeans go, it destabilizes the situation. And what we wind up with is a systems collapse. The whole system collapses. You've got central administration going away. You've got the traditional elite going away. The central economy goes away. And then there is a population decline. But out of that, after you've got like an ensuing dark age for a while, new things come on up. And you've got basically a phoenix rising up from the ashes. So even though the civilizations of the late Bronze Age end, out of them out of their ashes come people like the Israelites and the Aramaeans and the Phoenicians, and then even the Greeks, the Athenians and the Spartans. They were able to establish themselves because of the power vacuum that happened. All of a sudden they were able to move in. And so out of this we get new ideas. The alphabet, monotheistic religion, and eventually democracy. So the way I would phrase it is kind of out with the old and in with the new, and the new includes lots and lots of good things. And so in the end, I've concluded that, you know, sometimes it does take a large-scale wildfire to help renew the ecosystem of an old-growth forest and allow it to thrive afresh. And I think that's what we've got here. Thank you.
Actually a parallel with California. One more. I can't face you because I have to look at things for the language. So I'm just wondering if the droughts in California have any parallel, and if it will have a ripple effect because of the overall greater economy of the world and some of the droughts. I just was wondering if we could draw a parallel between what you were talking about and the current droughts in California.
Well, I think there's a definite possibility. I mean, when you have a drought, you never know what's going to happen. The one thing that I would point out, one of the differences between us and them is that we are fully aware of what's going on. We may even know what's causing it. I'm not so sure that they completely understood what was going on. So we have the advantage, in a way, of looking at this and realizing the ripple effects. And so if we know that this is a possibility, we will take steps to go and somehow make sure it doesn't collapse our civilization. But there are, there are parallels between back then and now. Obviously, it's a very different type of society today. But I would suggest that maybe we see what happened to them and realize that every civilization has collapsed for one reason or another, and we're probably not going to be immune. So I, especially as an ancient historian, I look everywhere I can for clues as to what can help us move forward. So if it's droughts in California or whatever, I still say one needs to learn from the lessons of the past.
I'm curious if you read S.M. Sterling's novel in which the present-day island of Nantucket ends up in 1250 B.C. and antics ensued? And if so, what he got right and wrong?
I have not read that. I haven't heard of it. I will go and read it now. Thank you.
Well, it's called Island in the Sea of Time. I don't know if it's still in print.
I
There's a
will.
bunch of sequels, too.
Wonderful. I'll get it. Thank you. And then I'll let you know.
An era of the Bronze Age that I'm particularly interested in is the fall of Akhenaten's Amarna and Nefertiti's empire, and how that was impacted by drought. In your research and your studies, did you look at the fall of Amarna?
The end of the Amarna period, which is somewhere about 1350, 1330 BC, I would say he's brought to an end by other things, especially internal rebellion and all that. There are evidences that droughts and famines are starting as early as his period, but I don't think that we can attribute that to his fall. I think it's more that he pretty much pissed off everybody with his religious things. So, but what is happening here has already begun back then. We can see it in the text.
A very short comment and then a question on self-awareness. I think we're aware that climate change is occurring now, the seas are rising, but we as a world civilization continue doing what we've done and not doing very much to combat that. The question is, you referred as a peripheral topic to the Exodus. My understanding is that there's really no archaeological evidence for the Exodus, and I wonder if you'd comment on that.
Sure. Commenting on whether there's archaeological evidence for the Exodus. We can be here all afternoon. The short answer is there is not evidence yet, but that doesn't mean there won't be. So far, we've got nothing that points to the Exodus. So in the book, I talk about it, but I do point this out. 1250 BC is probably about the only time it could possibly have happened, if it does, but we have yet to find anything for it whatsoever.
I was wondering, how did you get interested in anthropology and archaeology, and what is your advice to people who are interested in it?
Great question. How did I get interested in archaeology? It's my mother's fault. And it was a book. My mother gave me a book when I was 7. It was called The Walls of Windy Troy, Marjorie Bremer. It was a child's biography of Heinrich Schliemann and all about him finding Troy. And I just announced that I was going to be an archaeologist. My mother said, "That's great." My father said, "No, you're going to be a doctor." So now I am a doctor, just not a body doctor. But I decided at the age of 7 I wanted to be an archaeologist, and there's been no looking back. I mean, it's been tough. It's hard to get a job in archaeology, and that's what I would say. If you want to do it, if it's the one thing you love, then absolutely go for it. But be aware that you're probably going to be eating rice and beans in your parents' basement at some point. All right? I tell that to all my advisees. I'm the archaeology advisor at GW, and I say that to them kind of half joking. And I had one of my recent graduates of a couple of years ago who wrote to me and said, I was eating a tortilla in my parents' basement, and I suddenly realized I'm eating rice and beans in my parents' basement. I wrote her back, I said, I told you so. But if you want to go into archaeology, I would absolutely heartily recommend it. Just be aware that you will not be wealthy, probably not be famous or anything, but you will be doing what you love. And I do think that excavating our past history is an amazing thing. I go out excavate every summer. I've got 2 digs that I help co-direct at Megiddo, which is Armageddon, and Tel Kabri, which you may have seen in the news just recently. We found the oldest and largest wine cellar in the ancient Near East, and we just officially published it in PLOS ONE on Thursday. And so it made the papers. And so I bring my students with me every summer, and playing in the sand pit is just absolutely amazing. So if you want to go for archaeology, go for it. Just be prepared not to have any money.
With that, I want to thank you for doing so much of the spade work so we can enjoy all the research. I also have a question about how you look into this period, because we see all the physical evidence of what happened, military movements, earthquakes, drought, and so forth. Is there a way to take a look back and understand political movements, cultural attitudes? We see quite a bit of this in the rebirth in the Aegean Sea and in the Greek period. So I'm curious about this period also in the same vein.
Yeah, the problem with things like that, political views and all that, is we are, to a certain extent, at the mercy of the texts, what is left to us by the written evidence. And it's very hard, frequently those things don't leave their mark in the archaeological record. So if they've written about it, then yes, we can. But otherwise, we're quite literally at the mercy of the epigraphical evidence, the written evidence. So sometimes we can figure it out, and sometimes we can't. Right? As somebody once said, love does not leave a mark in the archaeological record, and I think politics might be the same upon occasion. If somebody is invaded, that's one thing, but otherwise it can be tough.
Is there any chance we'll see some blockbuster discovery in the coming century or next year?
Always. Always. You never know what's going to happen tomorrow. That's the beauty of archaeology. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.